All right, I'll turn it right back over to you, Representative Thompson.
Sure. So I am happy to call us to order. I believe we are at 1:05 p.m. And we have both myself, the Ward 7 rep, and the Ward 3 rep, Ruth Rottenberg. And we have actually only a couple agenda items today. First is to hear from our guest, Duncan Chaplin from Mathematica, to cover, I guess, the key findings from the measuring the impacts of DC school reform report. We will make sure to allow time for questions and discussion. And then we'll turn our attention to just kind of recapping what we've learned, both from Duncan, as well as what our grad school students, we are grateful for them putting together the crosswalk. And then finally turning to fall engagement, not all of which Duncan we're holding him captive for. And so to not further delay this, I'm happy to turn it over to you, Mr. Chaplin, to kind of get started. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. I'm Duncan Chaplin, a researcher at Mathematica, also proud parent of a DC kid. My daughter's 5 years old now at Hearst Elementary, so she's really enjoying that. So yeah, the purpose of our report is really to give a big picture look at the changes in student achievement over time, and in particular, to see if they changed in ways that might suggest that the reforms that started in 2007 really mattered. And so what we did is we used some national level test score data. It's called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And those data have oversampled DC for years. So we have a really good sample of both charter and regular schools in DC, and then a sample of schools from the rest of the country. And so we're able to follow both sets of schools over time, going back as far as 1992 and continuing through to 2017. And that's one of the big contributions of our paper, is to get that longer time horizon. I think a lot of the other papers that have looked at the topic have sort of looked at subsets of those years. There, that worked. This is probably not news to you, but I'll just run through quickly some of the reforms that happened during this period. Obviously, there was 2007 legislation that gave the mayor more control over the city. And one of the things that happened pretty soon thereafter was the impact educator evaluation system. So a lot of people think that that was a pretty dramatic change, both for DC and relative to the rest of the nation. And so we highlight that as one of the potential causes of the changes we're observing. Second thing that was going on, of course, was the growth in charter schools. And that may have been facilitated by the legislation that centralized authority over the charter schools. So it was all under one board. The charters had been growing before that, and they continued to grow pretty dramatically during that time. And then last but not least was the unified enrollment system that was set up in 2014. And that just made it easier for parents to pick and choose which schools they went to, and in particular, if they were switching between the charter and the traditional public schools. Get to our results quickly. So basically in math, we saw bigger than expected growth in both math and reading. And so that's exciting. It suggests that, you know, there was some real stuff that was happening in those early grades. And so of course that could be anywhere up to grade 4. In grade 8, we also saw bigger than expected growth in math. And so that is really exciting because it means that the things that happened in grade 4 didn't fade out. A lot of education reforms will generate test score changes, but if you follow those kids for a few years, they often wear out and other things get in the way. But for these reforms in DC, we see that continued higher performance in DC relative to the nation in grade 8 math. And so that was exciting. Here, I'm going to give you a little more detail than was in the earlier presentation. Figured we have a little more time, so I could squeeze this in. And this is really a picture of what our results were showing. the black lines in each of these four graphs. And can you see the entire graph, or is there like some of it hidden by? My screen looks like some of it's hidden, but I'm guessing you can see it all. Is that right? Yeah, great. So the black lines are showing performance for DC. And so you can see DC performance is going up in both grades 4 and 8 math, and definitely in grade 4 reading. In grade 8 reading, the DC performance was actually a bit flatter, though it was rising. And what we did is we compared it to a set of jurisdictions that looked similar based on their performance before 2007, and adjusted because the level was different. And so what we see is we're able to get what we're really an estimate of what would have happened in the absence of these reforms. Before 2007, things line up pretty well. After 2007, we see that gap growing, suggesting DC's performance was bigger than what we would have expected in grade 4 reading, and grade 4 math, and also in grade 8 math. In grade 8 reading, you see a little bit of a difference, but it's within that sort of greenish, bluish shaded area. And that's the area that we sort of think of as our area of uncertainty. We really don't know, that could just be noise. And so we don't want to attribute that difference to the reforms. We say that could easily just be noise. A few other points I want to make real quickly. The gains were definitely much bigger than we would expect from gentrification. Obviously, the characteristics, this population of DC changed pretty dramatically during this time. We felt we were able to adjust for that. Or in some cases, in other cases, we compared it with results from other papers, and we were able to show that this was really likely something more than what gentrification would have caused. And in particular, the free lunch data that's typically used to measure poverty in education studies, our results just don't align with what the changes in the free lunch data suggest. And last but not least, we did see some evidence of bigger impacts for Black students in math. And we think that might be partly related to the schools the different students were attending before the reforms. And it's quite possible that on average, white students were already attending higher quality schools, had access to higher quality teachers, and so there was less room for them to benefit. So I'll stop there. I did want to mention this paper was done with one of my colleagues, Dallas Dotter, and also another one, Maria Bartlett. And here's our emails of Dallas and I if you have any questions. So without further ado, I'll open it up to questions.
So I'm sure Ruth has questions. I know I do too, but.
Well, yes, since there's the two of us. So first of all, Duncan, I just wanted to say hi. I am your state board rep, and my niece went to Hearst. So hello.
Hello.
Yes, I love Hearst.
Oh,
so as you may have figured out at the board meeting, I have some skepticism about this. And I have skepticism about using NAEP in DC particularly, because the nature of what happened in DC is so extraordinary in terms of changes in demographics, as well as lots and lots of different policy changes. So let me just ask you some questions, having said that. Going to your, the charts that show the impacts on NAEP achievement, where you've got sort of the black line and then the dotted line.
let's see if I can.
I think it's 4.
Yep.
So can you just explain this to me? So the black line, that's actual growth on NAEP, or that's inferred growth based on all the other things you're inferring?
So the black line is the actual DC performance by year.
Okay, so then I guess my basic question is, on all of these, with the exception actually of grade 8 reading, which is a separate issue, the growth trajectory looks to me like it was at least as high prior to the reforms as it was subsequent to. So, and it was a poorer, less white population. So how does that figure into the claims that you're making?
Yeah, so we definitely are trying to adjust for that. Substantively, you could imagine that No Child Left Behind had some impacts, maybe nationwide, but probably not a whole lot of that. Mostly, I think, yeah, DC was improving before 2007. Our estimates suggest other areas that might have been experiencing similar growth didn't experience continued growth after that point. And that's after trying to adjust for those, certainly the race and ethnicity. And then our evidence suggests that the free lunch would not have made a difference either.
So in other words, you're suggesting that all these other places that you think are comparable, they were rising at the same level prior and they flattened out and only DC continued? Is that?
That's a way to think of it. I think the math is a little more complicated than that. So we were using the data for other places to try and construct an estimate of what would have happened in DC in the absence of the reforms. But it is based on the roughly a weighted average of the other places. So that's, I could say approximately, you could say that's what's going on. I don't think, we haven't gone through to say, let's identify specific places and say, do we see the growth slowing down? But I think that's likely what happened.
So, I mean, what would you say to someone like me who says, and I can't I can't follow the math completely. I can do some of it, but for those of us that don't have the same, understanding of how all the methods worked here, what would you say to someone who said, but wait, we were on a good trajectory and we stayed on a good trajectory. So why should I assume that all this subsequent growth is based on the three things that you have named?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so certainly our evidence suggests that the growth would have slowed down considerably based on the results, based on our analysis of the other jurisdictions. But I see what you're saying. It would be useful if we could literally show a set of jurisdictions where growth slowed down as evidence of that. And we haven't done that exactly. So I'll have to think about that one some more. That's useful.
Or could you even give me, just sort of like examples of why is it that everybody was growing? I mean, when I look at the NAEP data, I don't think that in general, and this is too small for me to see how much the growth is. So maybe it's distorted by what I'm looking at, but my sense of NAEP data is in general, the whole country did not move up super quickly during those years.
That's right. That's right. Whereas DC was, but or at least relatively speaking. So our comparison is more with areas that were also growing. You could imagine that No Child Left Behind would have helped a lot in some places in those early years, but the impacts there's only so much it could do. And so if you wanted to move beyond what No Child Left Behind could provide, you needed more reforms. So that's one interpretation of these results.
All right, well, I'm not going to belabor this, but
Yeah.
you see my point.
Oh, yeah.
And then I have one other thing I want to raise, and Ebony Rose, you can tell me whether I should do it now or we can rotate through.
Well, I have a couple questions also. I know we have about 10 minutes for questions. So since it's only two of us, I'm sure we have. I feel like there's ample time. I mean, I guess I'm curious, when you say, like, how do you rule out other factors? So, and separate them from governance. So like, I think about a lot of the human capital reforms that happen within DCPS, or, alignment to instructional materials. Like, how do you separate out reforms that happen that are not related or could have happened regardless of governance structure, from what is attributable to governance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point, and we can't. So all we're doing is just saying everything that happened after 2007, other than the changes in the demographics. And so absolutely, if you think there's other reforms that would have mattered more than the ones we highlighted, then obviously those could be the ones that made the difference. Our understanding is these were some of the major things that happened. But if you think, and by human capital, what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, so like I think about changes to like I think about we instituted impact during this time, right?
Oh, yeah,
Like
so
I
impact
think
was,
about
yeah.
some of the we changed a lot of our you know, the whole dynamic with the teachers union and tenure and all these different things happened. Or the bonuses that people get. All of that happened during this period of time. And if you're someone, and there have been different theories of changes, but one of the arguments that people heavily bought into, for better or for worse, was that one of the biggest linchpins and indicators of student success is the quality of teaching that they receive. And so I think of it like almost anything else when it comes to human beings, there are different inputs. And so how do you say like this was the thing that made the difference?
So absolutely what we think is it's some combination of policies that drove improvements in teaching quality. And impact almost surely was a big part of that. And the improvement in teacher pay could have easily played a big role. So we didn't emphasize the increase in teacher pay, but definitely that was there, and that would make sense that could have mattered as well. And any changes in professional development. So we're not separating out those different pieces of the policy. We agree those are all things that probably matter.
So if you're not, I guess like if you're not separating them out, and maybe this gets to my second question, how do you then attribute the difference to governance? And
So
maybe
saying
the question is, what do we consider a similar jurisdiction? Are similar jurisdictions like, yeah.
So we were thinking of this in terms of governance encompassing adding things like impact, increasing the teacher pay, doing dramatic things to really try to make a difference for the district. That was, when I used the word governance, I was referring to that package. Making sure that charter growth continued, making sure that parents had choices. It was all part of the system. And so we think DC did much more dramatic things than most other cities. We did do some runs where we excluded other cities that did dramatic things. For example, New Orleans. Interestingly, estimates of impacts for New Orleans are similar to what we find in DC. So both cities did very dramatic stuff during this period, and they actually experienced fairly similar levels of growth compared to what we estimate would have happened in the absence. Doug Harris did some estimates for New Orleans. One of the interesting trade-offs here is if what's going on is bringing in higher quality teachers, there could be a limited population of those to grab. And Doug also did some work with Baton Rouge, which also tried some fairly dramatic reforms and didn't see as much benefit. And one of the theories is they had more trouble recruiting the better teachers there. It's possible.
So I'm sorry. And then I guess I'm also curious, like what the criteria was for a similar jurisdiction. Is it demographic or is it something else?
Well, okay. So the major criteria for all of our runs was having that, similar levels of growth before 2007. So getting that dotted line and the black line to match up. In addition, we looked, well, we wanted to get rid of the districts that were doing similar dramatic policies. So as I said, we got rid of New Orleans. We also looked for states that had gotten rid of teacher tenure, at least according to their websites. So we did some runs where we dropped Florida, Kansas, North Carolina, North Dakota. New Orleans had very large charter growth, so we dropped them. Unified enrollment happened in Denver, New Orleans, and Newark, so we dropped them. So we ran models with and without these states or cities, and it didn't make much difference. They weren't big enough fraction of our total sample to matter. But that was for the comparison group. Yeah.
So, and I apologize if I'm a bit dense here because my background is not in research.
No.
So when you say governance, you're referring to the entire package of reforms,
Yes,
not necessarily our governance structure, like who makes that decision.
right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, certainly a lot of people attribute it to the mayor getting more control, but yeah, I agree. It's a more complicated package, but we weren't estimating the impact of that per se. It's more the package of specific packages of reforms. So obviously you could have a mayor take over and not do any of these things, and
Right,
you wouldn't
yeah.
expect these changes to happen.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay.
My best guess is it's a combination of choice and accountability, that those reforms that promoted accountability and choice may have been responsible for the changes we observed.
Can you say more about that?
So I think of choice as being shown through the charter school growth and the unified enrollment system, and then the impact accountability system for teachers as relating to accountability. And those things happened, I think, much more in DC than in most other cities during this period.
Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. Because I was trying to track. I guess I never take for granted that people mean the same thing by language. And so when I heard governance, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
study about literally like the impact of mayoral control. But what you're saying is actually a broader set of reforms.
Yeah.
And you see it actually as both choice and accountability is the two that really move the needle. Is that correct? Am I stating?
Yeah, I know, and I think this is maybe something we need to think about in how we frame our paper a bit, but I could certainly imagine this stuff happening in the absence of mayoral control. So absolutely, if a school board decided to do these things, I think they might get similar results.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. I thank you, because I was like, okay, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I don't know how often school boards have done similar reforms, but that's a separate question. I haven't studied that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for answering my questions. I know Ruth had some follow-up questions too.
So I have two. So first actually relates to what you were just talking about, which is it's just to try to understand this, which is if you're comparing us to similar districts, that is those with similar growth, but taking out those that had these reforms.
Right, the ones that did the similar reforms. So we're really trying to estimate.
So I guess you're not in a position to say who you're comparing us to, but it seems like I just wonder then, because there wasn't all that much improvement. I mean, there wasn't great improvement among states during that time. I'm just looking at a NAEP graphic here, and from 2002 until 2007, the national numbers went up 2 points. So I'm not trying to nitpick. I'm trying to understand where this is coming from.
Here's a graph showing DC and our counterfactual, and then a line for each of the states that we used to try to create that counterfactual. And obviously, I don't expect you to be able to see those very light lines very well, but the general point is there are some that were showing growth over time, others didn't. And so when you weight them together, you can get the counterfactual.
All right. Okay. So let me switch to something different. And I have this, which if somebody tells me if it's worth sharing, I can. So one of the things that I have done a lot with NAEP is, and this relates to your free and reduced lunch. The free and reduced lunch statistics, as you know, are all kind of hard to use at this point. They're really, really hard to use in DC because I think we started earlier than most cities to use community eligibility, and we use it much more than most other places. So it just, it's a very tough thing to use.
Yep.
So what I try to use is in 8th grade NAEP, you can look at parental education, which isn't perfect, but it's it's a reasonable indicator of various issues of poverty and so on. And if I look at that, and I'm looking at it, I can send it to anybody. What's super clear in DC is that the big improvements are much more the let's see, let me just follow this better. If you're going from 2002 to 2000, I've got 17 actually. Actually, no, I have 19. Well, actually, I can't. I mean, now I can't. I didn't set this up the way I hoped to, but you do see different so high school graduates, just as an example, go down from 2009 to 2019 several points, and they say the same for students for where the parents graduated from college. Anyway,
So there
it's
are
just
big changes
when you
over-
look at it that when you look at it that way, you see different things going on. So
Yeah, so parent ed, I believe they changed the coding over time. And so we looked into that and thought about using it, but it felt like it was going to be too complicated to merge in the earlier years of data. So that's the trade-off of really, how many years of data do we use versus what variables do we use? But absolutely, I think getting, some external source of parent education over time, and a better source of parent income. I did put up this graph here just showing the free lunch data. It doesn't look like DC really stands out there for math, but as you noted, there's just been so many crazy changes in how people code free lunch that it's a little hard to know what to make out of that. The other
I just
thing
asked on this graph, so the black line is showing the increases of students on free or reduced lunch. Is that what we're looking at?
Yep.
And I apologize for interjecting. I know Dr. Patterson, Representative Patterson has joined us. Mr. Chaplin, I know we're a little bit over, but I want to make sure that if our at-large colleague has any questions, he's able to answer them, because you've been amazing in helping us better understand, like, what is this thing? Representative Patterson, sorry.
Thank you so much, Representative Thompson. I appreciate you providing me the opportunity to ask questions at this particular time. As I joined a little late, as you stated, I have no questions at this particular time. It has been very informative, the part that I've seen thus far. So at this time, I don't have any questions, just catching up with the whole conversation. So thank you.
No worries, thank you.
One other point I was going to make real quick, the lack of results for grade 8 reading suggests to me that you could think of, well, in a lot of education reforms, you'll see impacts in math, but not reading, or impacts in the earlier grades and not the later grades. And so you could think of the grade 8 reading as sort of a control for SES and say, well, yeah, we don't have the ideal controls we'd like to have, but we do see that lack of impact in grade 8 reading suggests both that the reforms didn't matter there, but also that we've controlled reasonably well for SES. Because typically you would say the higher SES kids would have higher reading scores. And so we would have, if we were having problems with the matching, we would have expected to see an impact there as well.
Just because I just organically can't let any argument go unanswered.
Yep.
One alternative way to think that is, I'm very much into sort of teaching of content. And one of the critiques, I think, of No Child Left Behind and all the subsequent reforms is there such a focus on the basic skills that are on the PARCC test and so on, that there's not a focus on the content knowledge, the history, the social studies, the science. And that, I think almost everybody would now say, is hugely relevant to where your reading is on 8th grade. So I guess another way to read this arguably is, okay, we did the thing with the basic skills at the early grades. We skimped on the stuff that would produce later grades improvement. The result is we're kind of where we were, at least on reading, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's very possible. Absolutely.
But I also want to say,
But
I
if
appreciate,
the
I really,
story was, if the story was that it's higher income families moving into DC, I would have expected to see, you know, that black line be much higher than the dotted line, right? For grade 8 reading as well. So I'm sort of taking the grade 8 reading as evidence that at least I don't think I'm biased upwards on the other ones. That was the only point I was making there.
That's helpful. Well, I think we, at least the 3 members here, can say that this has been helpful to us. Thank you for taking the time to present and answer the questions. We'll make sure to share the slides with the rest of the board and the notes with the rest of the board. And as I said earlier, I know we're a little over time with you. And so I want to be kind of as respectful as possible, given we're already running a little behind. And just thank you for joining us.
thank you very much. And I hope I'll see you around at some school stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Enjoy Hearst.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Hey, y'all. So that was helpful for me because when he came and presented to us, he essentially was like, yeah, this shows that governance made all the difference. And so if nothing else, I would say that was a helpful realization, because I'm sure that it will come up in our conversations later. Ruth, I am putting a link to the crosswalk in the chat. I wanted to use, and I know we're over time, but I wanted, and maybe we can just kind of mush these things together. But I wanted to use this meeting, to just give some time to debrief, because we didn't really have time to debrief after the students presented to us, to see if what they shared was helpful, like if we had learned enough, because they went straight into that session with John Paul for their own learning. So I'm putting that back in the chat. And then B, since we are no longer, it seems like, doing the fall engagement meetings, and as a committee, we had raised our hands and said, hey, that would be helpful to us as far as, you know, doing that city tour. If we, to put on our radar that we need to start thinking about some other way to move that forward, because I don't believe, and I guess John Paul can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that will be an opportunity that we'll be able to take advantage of. Does that sound like a good use of our time? I know we can't control everything, but that's kind of where we are.
That's fine with me, provided that part of the discussion on the engagement is, therefore, what are we going to do and what are we going to engage on? Like, what are we trying? How do we focus this more?
Yeah, I don't, I guess my question is, and we can start there, but my question is, given that it sounds like no one bid on our contract, and we had said as a committee, we want to use that time to engage with the public. We still want to engage with the public, but what does that look like? Because it's not that we're going to be able to, and I don't know what other, if other committees are having this conversation. I think we were hoping to start that conversation in the working session, but we didn't get to it. And so given our timeline, knowing other things are coming down the pike, we need to at least start the discussion around what do we do instead. So I don't know if there are thoughts, but I mean, I'm happy to, I will say that I for one, I'm a little disappointed that we can't do it all together. And here's why. I do think that people care about governance, as I've shared with you all before, but I don't think they think about it as like the thing that you know what the thing is that moves my spirit or is my number one priority is governance. I think people understand governance as they experience it. So when they can't, like right now, people are frustrated that they don't understand what's happening in schools, that they don't feel like they have a voice in the decision making. All of the things we hear from people are governance issues. That being said, the same people who show up and say, hey, this is how it's affecting me are actually, are in my opinion, not the same people who are going to say, you know what meeting I need to be at tonight? A meeting about governance. That being said, some of the broader issues of the board are a little closer, I think, to what families and educators think about on a daily basis. And so my hope was that this would be an opportunity to kind of expand our reach beyond those who would just naturally say, hey, yeah, like that resonates with me. And so I do feel a need to still do engagement. I don't know if I guess whatever we were proposed, we would have to go back to the admin team and the board to figure out how we adjust. But I am worried about how do we communicate the why the value as a standalone thing to the general public. It's just not the thing that keeps people up at night. Is like governance, like it's not sexy. So, and tell me if that's all in my head, but it is how I've experienced these more policy-oriented conversations.
should I just jump in?
Sure, yeah, it's a discussion, jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right that people don't think in terms of governance. That's right. I mean, I think it's sort of our job to some extent to connect the dots. And maybe one way to think about it is that, as you say, this is a moment where people are experiencing the lack of responsiveness hugely. Just even people who in the past didn't feel like it was an issue are feeling it hugely because on every issue around reopening and safety, people can't get answers. And I think it's an opportunity for us to, be able to put forward ideas about how it could be different. And I guess one question is, where would we put them forward is one of the issues. But, if we had sort of some, I mean, supposedly Chairman Mendelson is going to have a hearing this fall about the relationship of OSSI to the mayor and or some other entity. And, I think as a committee, we could come up with some proposals, some ways of talking about that at that hearing that respond to some of the things that we've been hearing. I mean, OSSI in particular that's where a lot of the health and safety recommendations are coming from. It's a way of talking about it, and we can connect it to other issues as well. We can present them to the council. We could put them forward even in an informal way and designate one of our public meetings or one part of it to what I call y'all come, we're going to have a special part of our hearing where we really want to hear what people have to say on the responsiveness of our education institutions. If you have some ideas on it, please come and talk to us. And you could have some.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to see John Paul's trying to jump in.
Emily can go ahead because she's in her park.
Hi, sorry if it's noisy. I'm going to try to find a quiet place, but I have two thoughts on sort of what you're saying, Ebony Rose, about it not like governance not being sexy. I agree with that. I think it's a pretty wonky topic. And I also think it's important, especially right now. And so also just in terms of the community outreach or, community input sessions, we don't have outside vendor to help us, but we could still do it. So I don't want to like take it off the table. So I have two thoughts about that, like the kinds of outreach we would do. I think there are definitely a lot of folks who are tuned into the governance issue in DC and would be really eager to talk about it, as Ruth, I think, was suggesting. And then the other piece is maybe part of what we do is just sharing what we're finding, so there are different kinds of outreach we're doing, and maybe one of them is for a less wonky audience, and we could figure out how to do communications around that, like how we would get people interested in coming, but it would be more like, here's what we're finding, and then here's a time for discussion. So those are just some thoughts I have about how we might move forward with it.
John Paul, I'm gonna assume you took yourself out the queue.
I was going to defer to the members of the committee, and then I'm happy. Mine were more technical type things about the upcoming hearings, so we can wait for those at the end if you want, or I can just give them now real quickly, whichever.
Are you like me and gonna forget?
I'm not going to forget.
Okay, well, I'll
He's not as old as you, Ebony Rose.
no one is. I'll go ahead and let Representative Patterson jump. Clearly that was a joke. Let Representative jump in.
I'm loving the camaraderie right now. What I was going to say about this community engagement as far as governance and stuff like that, I think people experience it individually, but they advocate or express it in groups. So, it's like anything, like something happens and, we say, okay, why should we get vaccinated, or who's determinant of that? And we'll feel it individually, but then we get with a group that also feels the same way we do to express and stuff. So as we're thinking about trying to do some of the community engagement around governance, I think it's really going to be more so with certain groups that are very attuned to it, have shown an interest in expressing how they feel, good, bad, or indifferent. And then like going from there and engaging those particular groups. Because I just don't, there will be some people who will show up when you say you want to have a meeting about governance because they're wonky like us and they understand all the specifics. So they'll show up and and they'll express it and they'll get into the details and everything like that. But for the most part, there are certain groups who kind of look at it and will have a representative or someone who will speak on and say, this is where we are on this particular issue of governance. And that's how you'll probably get, most of your response are the tenor of how the city feels from those particular groups and who they feel from. So just wanted to add that aspect, because that's been my experience when it's been something policy wise, because policy work is just, it's not sexy. It's a lot of stuff. It's just really not, and you have to be really into it to want to express it. You may understand it, but you have to be really into it to want to go out there and advocate for it.
I was gonna say I appreciate that. I clearly was on mute, but I appreciate that. Representative Gasoy, you said that we don't have an outside vendor, and I saw John Paul nod in agreement. But that this is something we can still do. Do we have a decision from, I don't know if it comes from the leadership or who makes the decision on if this is something we are going to pursue? Because we had mentioned that it was like a fall timeline. Do we know?
Sorry. That's a really good question. And I guess my question is, what is this? Like when you say, is this something we're going to pursue? You mean engaging the public around governance or something else?
The
Or in
fuller,
addition to?
no, the fuller engagement session. So and I'll state it as I remember, and you can totally tell me if I'm remembering it correctly, incorrectly, or otherwise. I recall that we had talked about doing a set of citywide meeting, maybe like 3, but that we would have topics from the board.
Oh,
It
yeah.
sounded like one of them was going to be like the work we're doing around the stars. I know we raised our hand as a governance committee. I'm not sure if we selected a third thing. But then I remember a communication saying we didn't receive a bid. And I guess my assumption, which sounds like it was incorrect, that's the incorrect part, is that we weren't moving forward because we didn't have a vendor to do it. I know our capacity is limited, but has
Yeah.
a decision been made that we will or we will not move forward with those series of engagements?
I think it's up to each committee that was involved, and it's, it could be, what I would say is if there's interest, like I know that Ruth and Jacques' committee is going to do, we're all, is engaging all of us in the community outreach piece for their work. And then, so the question is, if this committee also wanted to do that, then it might make sense to combine those efforts, but it might not. I guess what I meant when I said we could still do this if we think that's the best way forward is this committee could do outreach. It doesn't have to be in the format that we outlined in that proposal. You know what I mean? So I guess what I was saying is if outreach at this point is what would be best for moving forward, then we could talk about how best to do it. And that might mean combining efforts with the ANA committee, or it might mean just doing it, just our own effort. My bigger question, I guess, that I was asking is, if we did do that, like, what is the ultimate goal? Do we just want to understand what folks are thinking about governance at this point, what they think would be best, or is it more like, like I said, sharing what we have learned, or a little of both? Is it informing what we should do next? So I guess it's a big part of a bigger question of what's next for this committee in general, for me. Does that make sense?
I don't know if it completely answers my question. I do understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Sorry. So wait, what
No
part of your
worries.
question?
I think I'm looking for who makes the decision. So I think.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
I didn't. So what I assumed that if we would have received a vendor, we would have received a bid, we would have moved forward with that series of engagements. And we didn't receive a bid. So then I was like, oh, these aren't happening.
Right.
And so I don't know, like, I guess and I'm one member, I'm the chair, but I'm one member. And so I'll say as one member, I think engagement is important. I also think this topic and committee in particular would benefit on pairing with others, just because like if there was a way to do it where it was like a what do they call it, World Cafe model, or where you could pick 2 or 3 things, we actually might get some voices that otherwise would not just show up for a governance meeting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
So I think that's important. But at the same time, I am also sensitive to, as I think we all should be, just the capacity of this body. We have a small but mighty team. And as much as I appreciate our mighty, the small part is not lost on me. And so those are the considerations that I'm thinking through, but I was not sure who made that decision. Maybe it's because I'm a new member, but it wasn't clear to me when, like, who says like, all right, we're doing it, we're not, the buck stops here. So I'll stop talking. I know Representative Patterson has his hand up, and so does Representative Wattenberg. I don't know if you can see that or not, because I know you're on your phone and that gets
I
hard.
can't. So also, just quickly, I would just say that it would be helpful to hear from John Paul on whether, what was in our plan limits us in terms of being able to do that kind of outreach. I don't think so, since we were planning to do it, but just to make sure. And then if not, then I would say it's up to us to propose it, us as a committee, to the board. And then I guess I would also want to ask you, John Paul, about capacity and what it would mean for staff. And so that's all, but other members can go first. And I know John Paul will remember.
I'm sure John Paul is taking notes, and I'm assuming Representative Thompson, Madam Chair, you were going to ask me next to go next, so I'm just jumping in. But I don't see it being a problem if we were to, add it to A&A, so to speak, as co-chair of that with Representative Wattenberg. I do concerned a little bit about timing, like where we are right now in community outreach, and who we're engaging at this particular time, and how does that fit into who you would like to, for this particular subject, which is a little bit different than the STAR framework governance, and who you would like to reach if we're still going to reach those individuals. That would be my only concern in that particular area. I do think it is more efficient to do work that way. It would have been great if we would have said, okay, we're going to combine these two together at this particular time, and kind of done that. Hindsight is 2020 at this particular time. Darren has worked diligently over time and everything. And so I do worry sometimes about capacity for Jean Paul's group, because I've seen from our work, this stuff is a lot. It's a lot on them. It's a lot. And I want to be considerate, as you stated, Madam Chair, of their time, how we interjected into AA, if that were to be a decision, and what were you looking to get for your particular part from which constituencies, were basically all my questions I wanted to add. But I do think it is more efficient to do it that way.
I think that's helpful, Ruth. Representative Wattenberg. I work with adults, so I don't.
That's fine. Well, I'm sorry, I thought you have those too. So I guess we can go any way we want. How about that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so I have a few thoughts on this. I mean, I think for this group, the question is, who do we want to engage about what, when? That's sort of one thing. And then the other thing is, what are we aiming for, right? So, and they're related, obviously, but let me say something on the who we're trying to engage. I mean, I may have a different view on this. I feel like insofar as people are interested, they can come to our meetings. Insofar as they're not all that interested, having a special meeting isn't going to get them there, and it's not going to get them to another meeting either. In other words, the having a special meeting on all three issues, I'm not sure that was going to draw people that would be different than the ones that either come to our meetings or that we see when we go to our own ward meetings or our own ANC meetings. For me, and I just want to say, every ward is different, every ward structure is different, and each of us deal with this in different ways. For me, mainly the way I would want to engage this question with people is not to say, please come out and spend an hour and a half with me talking about this issue, but to raise it in a bunch of different forums, to raise it when our Ward 3 group gets together, to raise it when I'm at a PTO meeting talking about something else, to raise it in my newsletter, so that I just sort of start to get some sense of, what do people think? What sort of the evidence on this? Where are people? Do people care? And that can, influence me. And as I share it with you, maybe it influences you and vice versa. So I understand that. I mean, I don't think on this issue, or for that matter, on the STAR issue, I think STAR gets more because it's already out there. None of these are on their own going to attract huge audiences. It's up to us to sort of figure out, I think, how to go to other meetings, how to go to other audiences and elicit what we can. And based on that, make our decisions about how to go forward. That's sort of how I see this. And it may not be how everybody sees it. But if we were to see it that way, one thing we could do is just, have not a whole survey, but, 3 questions that we have that we might ask this committee and other members, over the course of the next 6-8 weeks, as you're out there doing other things, start to ask people these questions. Do you feel like you can, that there's responsiveness on going back to school and issues around safety or issues around virtual school or whatever? So that's sort of one thing about engagement. And I guess I would even put that forward as a proposal, that the way to think about this is not let's have separate meetings, whether it's around 3 different issues or our own issue, but how to enable us to go out to other meetings. And then the second thing is, what are we aiming for? And I see John Paul thinks that, John Paul's view is that we shouldn't take a position on the bills, just talk about how the changes would affect the state board. I mean, I'll just say for me, I definitely have some views on this and I want to put them forward. I think that there are lots of ways in which this system is really failing us and our constituents and hurting the ability of people to have an influence on their schools. So I want an ability to say that. And if we want to, as a board, say it, that's one thing. Or if we don't, let individuals say it. Or both. I mean, in reality, individuals will say it anyway, but they may put more or less energy into doing it as a group or separately, depending on how we want to go forward. But I definitely feel like we have things to say. I have things to say, and I think, there's probably a group of us that have things to say, and maybe if we say them and put them out there, other people will, show some energy around it, or they'll say they hate it. Either one tells us something, or there may be not a lot of response, in which case, we can either move it forward or say it doesn't matter to anybody, so it doesn't matter to us. But so those are my 2 things.
Yeah,
One
so
is a different way of engaging, and the second is let's put together some proposals and play with them.
So what I hear is that going out to meetings is a form of engagement. And I agree with that. It is one form of engagement. I don't know if it's a different way of engagement. I think I think that that's something that we all should be doing as members, right? I do still think that places for conversation are important. I want to, and I feel like I typically have too many windows open, but built into our work plan was actually 2 engagement sessions. One initial one where we said as a committee, we wanted to have a series of community meetings to say, hey, like, how are people feeling about this, understanding this issue, possibly even do some education. We would then take that feedback and integrate it into our recommendations after we did some expert kind of understanding and interviews. And once the students kind of came up with, I can't remember what we called it, like the meta analysis. We were then supposed to come back and do more engagement, which I think is what some of that is what you're talking about, which is like going to different groups and getting feedback, and then using that to say, all right, here's where we started. We're going to show our work and say, here's where we ended up because we heard you. One of the things that I think is a built-in assumption that I personally hold is one of the reasons this governance conversation is so important is because people do not feel heard, seen, engaged, a sense of efficacy. So that variety of engagement, that creating a place for people to have a conversation about this, and that transparency around how our thinking has changed instead of coming with something fully baked, I'll say is really important to me. And when the opportunity came up to say, actually, we can do a set of engagements together as a board, as opposed to each committee doing its own engagements. Because remember, we looked at that Gantt chart, and it was a lot of Gantt on that chart. And so we said we were going to work together and with the anticipation that we would have a vendor to help us. And so I say that to say, the part about going out, hearing from people, engaging, I think is super valuable. I also don't see it as an either or. And what I heard from Representative Gasoy and our illustrative ED was that we still could do it as a unit if that's what we wanted. And that the third thing that was on the table is social studies standards. And so I guess my question becomes, is that if the ANA committee still needs to do its engagement, and the standards committee still needs to do its engagement, and we still need to do our engagement, is there a path forward for us to not deviate from our plan and do that together? Of course, with the expectation that there's some movement that we have to do as a committee between where we are now and what we would need to package things for the public. But yes, so that is the question, because we need to either make that adjustment or not. I'm trying to pull everything together, but I want to be really clear on like where we are, because I've gained clarity as far as where we are, because what I heard was it was off the table, and it doesn't sound like it is.
The only complication I would add, Ebony Rose, is at least for ANA, we need to be out in the field in October. I mean, it was going to be September. Now it's going to be more sort of September into October. So it's just soon. That's all. So can this group be ready for that? I think it could be if it was simple. That's all.
Hey, Jean-Paul.
I agree. I mean, I think one of the things that I would note specifically with the work of the ANA committee is there are time sensitive things that the committee has identified that we want to make sure that we are done with some of that work by a particular time. There is also the time sensitivity of this committee. It sunsets in December. And the idea was that this committee was supposed to submit recommendations. Now, there's nothing specific necessarily about the recommendations. I mean, the committee could recommend that the committee continues for another X amount of time to do XYZ project. I mean, that's what potentially one of the things that we could do. I think we're also in a spot right now, and I think Ruth made this point really well, that like there's a lot of, I don't know, angst is the wrong word, but a lot of frustration right now. And there are two things for that. One, we want to capture what those points are that are causing the frustration, but we also want to be cautious about asking right now before the frustration is fixed, right? Because we don't want to become another barrier for that type of discussion. We want to fix the problem first and then be able to identify it immediately afterwards of pointing to it. So I think one of the things that to me resonates here is also the work that we're doing on the reopening and identifying these issues, right, as trigger points that could be affected by governance changes, including in engagement and those types of things. So I think I think you're right in that they're all connected. I don't have any answers. I just want to make sure that we're like understanding what our timelines are, how it affects the work plan. And I think you're right in terms of of staff capacity, we're kind of at our limit, right? We don't really have a whole lot extra. So if we were to do a large engagement piece for A&A as well as for board governance and social studies, and then potentially literacy based on the information that Alistair was saying at the working session, we're going to have to depend more on members to do that engagement themselves and come back to us with that information. I think that's also to Ruth's point from earlier, is each ward is a little different, and you all know your wards, and Jacques, you're lucky, you know the entire city, but we have to depend on you to get that information. So is the question then for the committee to develop a list of the questions to ask people when you're in these meetings, right? Ruth made a really great point. If she brings this up at meetings in her ward, should we take what questions she's asking and develop a sort of set for everyone to ask and bring back information on? Does that feel too prescribed? How does it fit into what the conversation is in terms of governance? And I think this also relates then back to the earlier conversation with the gentleman from Mathematica, is how are you defining governance, right? Is it who is in control? Is it how the systems work together? Is it, what do we really mean on these things? Because it's all governance at the end of the day, like who is setting the policies and who is making those decisions, right? So I don't think I've helped anything. I just want to bring more complication to everything.
That's what you want to do, John Paul?
I mean, I don't want to, but I'm just saying, like, this is really complicated. And I think these are the conversations that we need to think about.
Yeah, I mean, and in the effort to, I don't know, likely further complicate, I actually don't think that as a governance committee, we have to be, in order to participate in engagement meetings, we have to be at the point where ANA is. I do think we have to make a decision about what we want out of that engagement. And maybe it is kind of like a listening session or a starter conversation or something like that. And so like, and I don't think it is unreasonable to be able to say, yeah, we'd be able to do that. I think we have I think we've collected a lot of good information, and I think we have members who are capable of moving us to that point. But the reason I brought up the question was because as the chair, I was unclear around where we were as far as if this was even a thing or not, and if we needed to shift the work plan. I also completely appreciate you noting that, yes, we do have a December sunset, but that a recommendation could be that we need to continue to work. That occurred to me. So I'm still a little, and I hope this is not me just being obtuse, but I'm still a little unclear on who makes if it's just that we say, yes, we'll be ready and we want to all do this together, or if somebody else makes that decision, and then like what that would mean.
Can I just give a quick, partly flip, but partly totally true answer to that, Rose?
As long as it's true.
I mean, yeah, so who makes a decision? 5 of us, right? I mean, if 5 people think the best way to go forward is we should have these group meetings, I think that's how we decide. I think my sense, and I may just be sort of communicating my concerns on it. My sense is there's not energy for that, and that's why it's not happening. But maybe there is, in which case, really, although to John Paul's point, I guess I would say, if 5 people want to do it, and there's agreement from at least those 5 and hopefully the rest to take it on their own, that's an agreement. If we need the staff to do it, then we have a complication. And it sounds like that's really not an option right now. I think we all observe that. And I think John Paul was being direct on that. Is that a fair?
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's not an option unless something else is moved to the back burner.
And in the end, if 5 of us think it's the right thing, then we agree to do it and we hope the other 4 agree to go along. But 5 people really have to be energized and say, yeah, we're going to go do it. We'll be part of it. And then, hopefully, like I said, the other 4 will sort of fall in.
So outside of capacity, is there a reason that we would not do this? Like, I guess, is there, and maybe, and where does that discussion happen? Because we didn't have it at the working session. Is this an email chain? And maybe we can have this offline because I know we're over. But I don't want to confusion because I was confused, but I clearly asked the question with a lack of energy or desire. And so is that the right answer? Is that we need to have a kind of a conversation offline about this as a board? And if we're going to do these meetings or not?
I mean, I think generating an email discussion would be a good idea.
And so then I would ask, as a committee, are we in a place where we would, where we see this as a needed engagement to move our work forward? I do. I'm not talking about the other work we have going on. I mean, our work. Like, do we see this as valuable to our work? Yes or no?
For me, I don't think having a separate meeting for 3 different issues, including this, is necessary to go forward. Not against it if that's what other people do, but no, I don't think it's necessary. I think there are other ways to do it.
Okay, but I didn't hear you say it's not valuable.
I don't know who's going to come that wouldn't come in other ways. So I guess if you put, 50 people in front of me, it would be valuable. I'm dubious about whether that's going to produce the 50 people that are different from the 50 people that are at some other events. But especially if we're not staffing it, right? If it's just all of us doing it on our own, I just don't know that that's the best way to get issues in front of people.
Can I jump in for a second?
That's fine.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, why'd you knock the seat down?
I guess to respond to that question, Ebony Rose, it would be easier for me to think about whether or not it would be valuable if I was more clear on what we're trying to find out, like what the purpose of the feedback is. And I guess I'm leaning towards agreeing with Ruth that there's probably multiple ways of doing it, and I'm not married to the, in-person or Zoom meeting way of collecting whatever it is we're going to collect. But maybe our first task really should be defining what is our next step in terms of, like, what do we want to land on, and how would community input help us with that?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, jump in, Rep. Patterson.
I agree that we do need to determine what is the ultimate, what we would like to find out. Not so much as what we want to do with it, but what do we want to find out from governance in these meetings and questions. But I do see a relevance in the meetings for the simple fact that I try to look at things from an equity standpoint, and knowing that a lot of the groups who are most impacted, that's how they communicate. That's how they've been communicating. That's how we've got the most input from communities that normally they don't attend a lot of group meetings or things like that. But we do want their input. Is that they have went to we reached out to them. We did some Zoom meetings, and for me in my professional job at that charter school that I work for, we've had town halls, we've had those things because it was really important for us to get parents' input on a lot of decision making that we're about to make. And we found that with certain constituencies, that's the best way to go about doing it. So I do see a relevance in it. And to make sure that we have equity built into getting information. So that's why I'm kind of.
Ruth, you're on mute.
Can I interrupt? So I guess my question to Representative Patterson is, so do you think that if there was a town hall organized either in Ward 8 just on this, or if there was one citywide just on this, or one in Ward 8 or some set of wards on this and 2 other things, you'd get more people than if you just put it had it at some other meetings going on? That's really my question. I agree with you that the input, the equity of input, all that's critical. The question is how to get it. So that's.
So I would say in response to that, Representative Wattenberg, is that, different groups kind of respond to the groups that they're most trustworthy of, that's going to represent their feelings and everything. So I do think it's more so, if we're going to add equity, it's one that is targeted toward those who that are least represented a lot of times in decision making. If that's Ward 8, Ward 7, some parts of Ward 5 at times, in different areas, I think you do have to have those individuals want to reach those individuals a little bit offsetting than just saying, okay, we're going to have these meetings. It's kind of like on the same scale of, you see the budget meetings from the mayor, and the mayor goes into the wards and she, makes sure they're in places that she can get the most input from, and that it's in areas that are where people will congregate, and she has over a course of time know this is the group that I'm going to work with to make sure, or this is the place I'm going to have it to ensure that I get the most input from this particular community, knowing how they elevate their voice in certain situations. It's kind of like that. That's how, you see some of the meetings that you have as far as community engagement from the government, from the administration, and that's worked in past administrations. I would say the same thing here. We have to make sure that we go to those areas where we know and work with individuals that we know, or even if it's us, to make sure that we get input from those groups, and they're allowed to provide that.
And you have a particular suggestion about how that should be, who should do it, where it should be? Because I think that's sort of where we're at, right? Is we want that input. Who's going to organize the meeting? Where is it going to be? What's the agenda?
Now, if it's me, and being, as John Paul said, I know the city, but I also know the ward. But like, say if I'm in Ward 8 and I want to make sure that I get the type of input that I want, whether it's on a Zoom meeting or somewhat in person or whatever case may be, I might start with, as a Ward 8 resident, with the ACC meeting. I know that the people that follow that meeting and everything, and people who tune into it on a regular basis, I'm going to get the type of response that I'm going to get. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I do know certain groups that you need to get with, or individuals you need to get with, to pull that meeting together to make sure that that voice is elevated and you get the input that you would like to have. So you could truly say, this represents this particular group of constituencies.
All right, we are at about 2:20, a little after 2:20. It sounds like we need some clarity on where the rest of the board is on this. It sounds like, I think 2 of the 4 members think engagement meetings are important, not just plugging into other people's meetings. Yeah. And that it would be helpful for the committee members to think about what questions we want to ask to the public. Is that right? Am I missing anything? Or did I say anything that incorrectly states where people are?
I mean, I would just say, I think that the kind of the decision point, what I feel, what I'm saying no on is that the best way of doing engagement on this is a specific meeting on this subject or on 3 subjects at once. I just want to be, I'm certainly for having meetings and engagement. I just want to be, it's like with who, when, and on what. So that's
Yeah, I mean, Ruth, I'm clear on that. That was the question.
okay.
I think, I think where I'm not sure if we're, or at least if I'm clear, is that it's not a, for me, it's not an either or. I think you need both. I don't think you get to do one or the other if you really want to create the most opportunities for people to plug in. And quite honestly, I think that the other committees could probably benefit from everybody working together on this. Like, I mean, I know that probably individual board members reach out to their wards differently, but and the board has had certain experiences with like who turns out and who they plug into. But I will tell you right now, as someone who never had staff and ran a meeting that people that plugged into because they couldn't get to other people, 50 people in front of you for a citywide meeting is not a huge bar. And if that is our standard and you say, okay, well, like, I mean, I do think that this is doable, whether we allow staff time or not. And I think for me, the question as far as what I prioritize typically is like, is something of value or not? And then I figure out how to get it done and when to get it done. So, yeah.
Well, I would just say in terms of starting a conversation, which I think is a good idea, is, you know, to put some proposals on the table, like, is it for one citywide meeting? Is it for 3 ward meetings? Is it for everybody does a, I mean, the thing is, to part of what you're saying, I guess this is where maybe I'm unclear. I mean, members can have meetings whenever they want on whatever they want, and they do so, right? So what we're talking about, I assume, is something larger than that. And then the question is, you know, is it, I hadn't thought about citywide exactly, and you sort of put it as citywide. I mean, is that what we're talking about, or?
Well, I think that was the initial proposal, was that we would have a set of citywide meetings so we can engage people around these issues, because they're citywide issues. And we want feedback from people across the city. And so I don't think it would best serve me to just have a conversation with people in Ward 7 about any of these issues if the same conversation isn't happening with people in Ward 2 or Ward 3. I do think consistency of information is important. And I know people who are like, I'm gonna go to the Ward 5 meeting and see if they said the same thing to the Ward 5 people that they said to the Ward 8 people. Like that's a whole different dynamic that you probably don't even deal with. It's just a we're some funny people over here. And so yes, my assumption was a set of citywide meetings, not necessarily 8. I believe the initial proposal was 3 across the city that so that's where I started from, was like our initial, what we as a board said we wanted to do was this. Is that still happening? Yes or no? And it sounded like it could still happen if we agreed it could still happen. I was not proposing anything different from what we had initially agreed to.
Well, there were multiple things on the table at the time. That's why I'm confused, but God,
what we
I hear you.
submitted, where we settled and what we submitted. Yes, there were multiple things before that, but like what we said we were going to do at the end of the day.
I think it was still a multiple choice, but so we'd still have to figure out which one, but okay. I don't want to belabor it. Just trying to
No
get clear.
worries. No worries, because I also want to get back to my job that pays me more than this.
Yes.
I got to be responsible as an adult person.
If somebody's auditing time, you know, I want to make sure that they get their day's work.
Right? Like, right. When the disclosures come out at the end of the year, I don't want anybody going, oh, Ebony Rose didn't pay her bills. So
I do want to quickly note, Representative Thompson, members for the committee, we will be sending out a poll sometime soon with new potential dates and times for this committee meeting. This time no longer works for Emily, and so we'll need to adjust the time to make that. So be watching your emails for that poll to come out, and we'll try to adjust it as quickly as we can.
Jean Paul,
Jean-Paul.
can I ask one more question? I'm sorry, Representative Thompson. I just have one more question for Jean Paul specifically. The survey, which is supposed to end this evening today, that's correct, for the assessments and accountability?
The ANA, I believe, does end today, but I can check that. Yeah.
I just want to make sure, because I still have some interested people. I'm still trying to send out. I want to make
For
sure that I hold them
principals.
accountable. Principals that I'm
It
talking
ends, yeah.
to.
It's supposed to close today. Yes.
Yes, I believe we
Today
have.
at midnight, so they have a few hours.
They have a few hours. So I'm trying to make sure that they get it, and I'm trying to hold them accountable, you know, pulling on friendships and things like that in relationships. So I just wanted to know, definitely today, midnight, right?
It's
I
not closed
I
yet.
can't get any type of extension or anything like that. I'm at my due time, right? That was my question, sir. And I see
Appreciate
Darren
it.
is on.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.